Welcome to the first episode. I know I've been promising to put out some other videos, and I had to do some editing and take some things out based off of advice from counsel. And while I was doing that, I was thinking, what could I name these videos? Everybody's, wanting me to tell, what led up to me leaving from the North Carolina Department of Adult Corrections, Columbus Correctional. And I really didn't know what to name them, but I decided to name them the Nicholson effect. And if many of you know, if you've watched any of my other videos, you know that Jeffrey Ivey, who holds the rank of a lieutenant, I'll put it that way, was talking trash and slandering my name at in-service. There were complaints filed on him because he was talking about another open investigation dealing with another staff member, talking about why I left, which was totally incorrect. And like I said, slandering and spreading false things, but we'll get to that. But I decided to use Ivey's name for things. I'm borrowing it from him. So these next few episodes are going to be entitled The Nicholson Effect. And I thought that it fit perfect because by the time I'm done with these videos, if NCDAC leadership does what they have the power to do, what is in their policy to do, me, Jason Nicholson, will have had an effect on that department. The information that I'm going to provide in this video and some other videos is information that the department has already asked from me almost a year ago. And I know that with me being a civilian now, I'm not entitled to any updates or anything on it. I know that they started acting funny when I was asking for more information that is public information and is available to me by law, not just state law, but federal law. The Freedom of Information Act information is covered. A lot of this stuff that I'm providing is stuff that I knew exactly what to ask for because of my previous position. And there are still a few things that they are refusing to give to me because they know that it will catch them in a lie. But, when this goes to court, I'm assuming that they'll probably try to settle. They don't want to go before a jury. But when this goes to court, that information is going to have to come out. The jury will need to see it, and the judge can order the department to release it. But anyway, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I'm going to you'll see me reviewing my notes here. One thing I want to point out, and if you watched any of my videos, this notebook right here was in my office the day the investigation began. And you'll learn that it wasn't a true investigation, and I'll point out things of why and things that should have happened. It was just they were trying to force me out because of what I was on to, and I had already been told, and the regional director hinted at that I wasn't even the one that he wanted to be the associate warden, the position that I was getting ready to get. So he used this to kind of funnel me out too. And I'm not saying everybody was in on everything at the beginning, but when they saw what was happening, they got word, they started trying to use things, and I can prove that. But anyway, this notebook was in my office, and I'll guarantee this because I told you in a previous video, I should have never been able to get this notebook back. But they wanted to know what I was going to ask for, and there was documentation in here that was taken out that could prove that several staff members were guilty of distributing contraband, excessive force, etc. But they took that out because they didn't want me to have that. And the officers are still working, so obviously they did nothing about it. But what they didn't know is on some of the stuff, now not all of it, at home I had this notebook there where I was keeping backups of some of my stuff. And my plan was, because Easter weekend of 24, I was going to bring this notebook home and put more information in my other notebook, but that is when I was put on leave and I was not allowed to get this and bring it home, and they took stuff. But anyway, I'm going to tell you where this all begins. On Sunday, July 16th, 2023 is where my major investigation started. This, you'll see through the videos that it tied in. There were several officers working with different gangs to bring in contraband, and it led to Officer Skipper being brutally assaulted. And if you look at this picture here, this is Officer Skipper with Warden Priest. Miss Priest was the associate warden at the time of this incident. But this is Officer Skipper. Since he has come back to work, he received an Employee of the Month award. But this officer is a food service officer. It means he solely works the kitchen. He is responsible for supervising inmate food preparation and ensuring that they prepare it right and they're preparing the amount and etc. But on the morning of July 16, 2023, Officer Skipper was brutally assaulted by offender Cleveland Caraway. This offender here, I know you can't see his whole face. I'm going to give you a better picture later. But this is offender Cleveland Caraway. He was assigned to the kitchen, and he went into the kitchen with a lock and a sock with the intention to kill Officer Skipper. And you may say, well, how do I know that that was his intention to kill Officer Skipper? Because as he was beating Officer Skipper, brutally beating him in the head with a lock and a sock, he stood over Officer Skipper and told him to play dead or he was actually going to have to kill him. This was reported to us by Officer Skipper. This was reported to me by the inmate, that he stood over Officer Skipper and told him to play dead or he was going to have to kill him. Now, upon my arrival at the facility, I received a call from Warden Walsh at the time, and she informed me that we had a staff assault, asked me where I was at and was I available to come to the unit. I was. I got to the unit upon my arrival. I entered into what we called a search area, the shakedown area. I ran into Sergeant McCoy. I asked him where the inmate was. The inmate was in what we called a holding cell. I asked him to bring him out, put him in one of the stalls where we search offenders, and I began to question the offender on why he assaulted my officer. Now, anybody will tell you that worked with me that is legit, that I considered everybody my officers, my sergeants, and it wasn't a controlling factor. It was that I was there. I was going to take care of them whether they were on my shift. I was the admin captain at the time of this incident. So I was over visitation, transportation, SRG officers, things of that. But I also did investigations into dirty staff, things like that. I was the facility intelligence officer, which is over gangs, and I had an SRG sergeant under me, Sergeant Oxenine, and I had two SRG officers that were under me but fell under Sergeant Oxenine, and that would be Officer Neely and Officer Spielman. Now, I know if you've looked at any of my videos prior to this, you have heard Spielman's name before, and you're going to hear it quite a bit the more that we get into these videos. But anyway, getting back to why I started this investigation. Officer Skipper was brutally assaulted. I questioned the offender. He told me that he did the assault. He was ordered to do the assault by the Bloods because a package went missing. And when we refer to a package, we are talking about contraband, whether it be drugs, cell phones, tobacco, cigarettes, whatever it was that came in, it went missing, and this offender was accused of it going missing. What I will later find out is that the order to take Officer Skipper out was ordered because the inmates were told that Officer Skipper observed a package coming in and he reported it, which is what a good officer would do. Now, during this time, the only time that offender Caraway was taken out of the holding cell, to my knowledge, was when I had him taken out when I first got there. I spoke to him. He was upset, crying that he was ordered to do it by the Bloods because of the package that went missing. They were blaming him for it. Now, let me back up. After I received the call from Warden Walsh, I called my SRG Sergeant, Sergeant Oxenine. I called my SRG officer, Sergeant Neely, and Sergeant Spielman. Now, at this time, I did not suspect any foul play from Spielman as far as bringing in contraband or anything like that. The further we get into this story, you'll understand where I'm coming from with Spielman. So I called them, asked them could they report to the facility. They all came. Also, Sergeant Gore, which is a shift sergeant who sometimes helps with SRG issues. At that time, I'm not sure what he does now, but at that time he would help us with SRG issues. I believe Officer Neely called him to see if he could come. As they got there, they asked me what I wanted them to do. I wanted them to review camera footage, see if there was certain people we could talk to. I went back to the associate warden's office with Miss Priest. Miss Walsh was in that office also, and we were reviewing camera footage. I was going back and forth to the holding cell, asking the inmate questions, who ordered him to do it, things of that nature. We were reviewing camera to see if he talked to anybody prior to entering the kitchen, and I was going back and forth. All right, we finished. We've interviewed a bunch of inmates that day. Warden Walsh has made the necessary contacts to the region. Regional Director Stephen Jacobs, Associate Regional Director. She just called, sent emails and made the calls. I'm pretty sure it was the Regional Director, Mr. Jacobs. I personally stayed to about 4:30 that evening to make sure that nobody touched the offender. Nobody took him out of the holding cell. Because we all know how people feel when their family or a coworker or something happens to them. And I wanted to make sure that nobody did anything to this offender to jeopardize the case or to jeopardize their career, because they were in their emotions, their adrenaline was pumping, etc. I personally took the inmate out of the holding cell, restrained the inmate when the vehicle pulled into Sallyport to transport him to Polk Correctional, which is Granville Correctional. I still use the old names. I personally put him in the vehicle and put a seatbelt on him. Now, the two officers that transported him, I know they wouldn't have stopped nowhere and assaulted the inmate or anything like that, took a risk of getting him out the car or anything. I know that. Later that night, upon his arrival at Polk, I received a phone call from Captain Frink. Now, Captain Frink used to work with us. He come up through the ranks with us. He made lieutenant with us. He transferred to Polk, and he made captain there. He called me and asked me what was going on with the offender. I didn't know what he was talking about. When he got there, the offender started walking with the officers and the nurse going to the nurse's station. My officers were still there. transportation officers that transported him, fell on the floor, talking about how he was hurting in his body and his ribs and his face because we had used excessive force on him at Columbus Correctional. Captain Frank asked me why we sent him that way, why he wasn't sent to the hospital, and I told Captain Frank, I said, Captain Frank, I personally stayed to make sure that nobody touched him after Warden Walsh and Associate Warden Priest left. I personally restrained him. While I was restraining him, he was still crying because of what had happened. He knew that he was going to face more time. At no time during this, while I'm restraining him, while I'm putting him in the car, did he say anything about anybody laying a hand on him or using force on him. I called my officers that were there. I told them just to get them something to eat, stay close to Polk because I wasn't sure what was going to happen. I asked them, did he say anything on the way up there? They told me that he was, just crying, really didn't say anything. They didn't know anything about the alleged beating, excessive force until they got there and he fell on the floor. I immediately notified Warden Walsh of the incident, and so she would know. And here's another reason, because now that the inmate had been transferred to Polk, he's now in the Central Region, which they're going to notify the Central Region Director, which is going to end up calling the South Central Region Director, which was Mr. Stephen Jacobs, and asking why we sent an inmate up there complaining of pain and that he had been beaten without first sending him to the hospital. Because now here they are, we've dropped him off, and if they say he's... So I've got staff that is stuck in Granville County waiting to find out if they're going to have to bring this inmate back or not. And so find out, Warden Walsh is notified. They keep the offender up there, and when he gets there, he's taken to the hospital, and come to find out that he is hurting in his stomach because he's got a blockage where he has swallowed some packages, balloons, containing contraband, containing drugs. Now, I never was notified of what the drugs were, but that's what we were told. So the next day, this was on a Sunday, I go in, we're continuing our investigation. Now it's even more extensive because the offender is alleging that he was beaten at some point before he left Columbus Correctional. Now, when I arrived, like I said, the only time I knew that he was taken out of his cell was Sergeant McCoy. I told Sergeant McCoy to get him out. He brought him out. I talked to him. He went through the spiel about the gangs and everything, put him back in the cell. Any other time that I went and talked to him, he was in the holding cell. As I was making trips back and forth from the Associate Warden's office to the holding cell, which was just down a short hallway. Now, during the time that I'm back in the office reviewing video, we come to find out the inmate that alleges that he was brutally assaulted in the holding cell. And we'll get to that in a little bit. Now, I go in on Monday, Columbus Intel SRG staff, which I've already identified for you, we continue to investigate the assault on Officer Skipper. We received intel that the hit was, in fact, a hit order by the Bloods due to Officer Skipper supposedly reporting now, is what the Bloods had heard, information on Officer Erica Jones bringing contraband into the kitchen. Now, I'll hit on Officer Jones in a little bit. She's going to tie in. And you'll see how this whole investigation led into right up until the day that I left. All this stuff ties in together. Offender Carraway was ordered to carry out a kill order, Officer Skipper, as payment for the package that he had stolen. Now, we were told that he stole the package. Come to find out, he had the package in his stomach supposedly, we don't know if that was the same package or not. Okay. Also on 7/17, we, the Columbus Intel, once we started finding out about this drugs, this package, for some reason, Mr. Stephen Jacobs didn't want us looking into it anymore. He specifically said, Columbus, leave it alone. But what he did do is, and this is to cover him, because if he'd have just took the investigation and did nothing, there would have been a lot of questions. But he ordered a regional intel team to pick it up. Now, in this case, I trust the person that was in charge of this team. Captain McCartney at Tabor Correctional. He's a captain there. He was over to SRG and a few other things there. He was kind of like what I was at Columbus. He just had a bigger facility. Tabor is probably 3 times the size of what Columbus was. So me and him were, with investigations on dirty staff, SRG stuff, etc. And then I had a few duties that he may not have. He did duties that I didn't have because of different facilities. Anyway, Mr. Jacobs put his team in charge of the investigation. Now, like I said, I trust Captain McCartney with my life. If there's anybody, there's a few people, but if there's anybody at Tabor Correctional that I trust with my life, it would be Captain McCartney. And I trust that he would do appropriate investigation. He's a good dude. Trust him with my life. All right. Offender Caraway was interviewed by Lumberton's intel team, which is part of the regional. Some of those guys are part of the regional intel team, so they do intel at Lumberton, but they also, when the regional intel team is activated, they would go with Captain McCartney to wherever they needed to go, or Captain McCartney may send them by themselves. Now, on our side, Spielman used to be on the regional intel team, but they removed him because he just refused to show up for stuff. He wouldn't go when they were activated on activations and stuff like that. So he was removed. So we didn't even have anybody on the regional intel team. Now later on we did, but at this time we didn't. So Lumberton sends and they go investigate. The investigation continues. The regional intel team, they go and investigate. They go and talk to him in Polk Correctional. And, he starts with he was assaulted. They used force on him. Pretty much tells them the same thing. It was a kill order from the Bloods because he supposedly had stole a package from them. And the reason it was on Skipper was because the Bloods believed that Skipper is the one that reported on Officer Jones bringing in contraband. Now, as we go on 7/18, we have been told to stop our investigation. I acknowledge that 100%. But I told my guys we're going to keep doing an investigation in the background because they're focusing on the inmate up there, which is good. Somebody needed to. But there was stuff that happened. We seen this inmate talk to different people on camera, and they needed to go ahead and be talked to. So we continued. As we did our investigation, there were 6 offenders transferred to Tabor, pending investigation into Officer Skipper's assault. Now, these inmates that were transferred, they were all high-ranking gang members. I don't believe all of them were involved in Skipper's assault. I know for a fact a couple of them, Spielman personally, looking back at it now and looking at notes and things, Spielman wanted these guys gone because they were interfering with his operation. So once he tried to tie these guys to Skipper's assault, it was a reason to get them gone. because they wasn't getting in trouble. There was, nothing on their record. Not saying that they wasn't doing anything wrong as far as contraband or stuff like that, but he knew that if he tied them to skipper's assault, with them being a high ranking blood, he could get rid of them. So they tied them to him, and it got them gone for investigation purposes. He couldn't prove it then, but they had to move them because of the investigation to split them up. So as it continues, you're going to see as we go through this that we go months without an update. I would call Captain McCartney. He would tell me, what he had. Like I said, I trust Captain McCartney 100%, trust him with my life. And as we're going through this investigation, and as these videos progress, you're going to see that this one incident led us to the infamous crew at Columbus Correctional that was having contraband brought in. You'll see that. And I'm going to try to share some pictures with you from different ones. And I'm going to go ahead and hit on the first one here. The first one that it led us to was a Chastity Holt. She was bringing in contraband for an offender, and she was also in a relationship with an offender. Now, when she resigned, at this time we had tasers. Sergeants and above had tasers. When she resigned, Miss Priest met with her in her office, and former Officer Holt, she was a big-sized woman, and she was taking her stuff off her belt, slamming it, and I thought she was going to throw some stuff at Miss Priest, and if she would have attacked Miss Priest at this time, I might have got in trouble later, or I might have just got a counseling. That ain't the right way to handle it. But if she'd have jumped on Miss Priest in that moment, I'd have had no choice but to tase her. I mean, that's how mad she was that we had got her. And the way that we got her was, we received intel that her and the inmate had gotten tattoos with each other's initials on their hand. And there was a certain way that you had to look at it to see. So I had somebody that I could trust that worked with this officer, and I said, just see what you can see for me, because if I go up and be like, hey, let me see your hand, it's going to throw everything off. Well, she could see it. It was the inmate's initials. When we got the inmate, we looked at his hand. It was the CH for Chastity Holt. Now, the day that we got her, we got the inmate first. We got a cell phone that he was using to contact her. Now, of course, it's locked, so we're going to have to send it to Raleigh, and they're going to have to do their thing to get into it. But we locked the offender up in restrictive housing, and I had the captain assign her to that dorm where that offender worked, and asked the captain just to keep an eye, And throughout the night, when she found out that that offender was in restricted housing, she cried all night long. And you might say, well, how do you know what she was crying about? Well, an offender went up and told her that he had been caught with the cell phone and that he had been placed in restricted housing. Immediately after receiving that information, she went to the control desk, and she sat at that control desk and she cried and she cried. And the next day is when we had her brought in, and she ended up resigning. But we had her for being in the relationship, and we didn't actually catch her with contraband, but that's what we had her for. Now, while we were investigating this, she gave us information on another officer that was telling people that he was related to someone in command at Columbus Correctional, and that he was bringing in contraband steady. Now, this name had already come across my desk, and we were investigating, just couldn't get him. he was already on our radar, per se. So we start digging into this officer more, and in the next episode, I'm going to give you a little bit more information on him. But I want you to realize that today, the first episode of the Nicholson effect, I have laid out what started my investigation. Officer Skipper was brutally assaulted, which led us into the infamous crew at Columbus Correctional that was bringing in contraband. They had a system worked out, and they may still out there. I don't know who's left there now. They would rotate who would bring it in, where it would be dropped, and if we were on to one, that one would lay low for a little while, and this one would start bringing it in. But it led us to this crew, and it also put another officer on our radar. Well, he was already on our radar, and that he was mainly dealing with the Hispanics, and he would work with the Bloods. And like I said, this was a blood operation in the kitchen. And you may say, well, why are you telling us this stuff about the Bloods? Are you afraid? No, I am not afraid. I wasn't afraid while I was there, and I'm not afraid now. I'm just not. Everything that I'm telling can be backed up. And like I said, if NCDAC does their job, once more of these videos start to come out, you'll see some changes at Columbus Correctional. There should have already been some changes at Columbus Correctional based off what they asked me and what I told them. I mean, and you'll find out more in these videos, if they put certain people on a polygraph, which by policy, state policy, they can do, they could fire that person when they failed a polygraph. And if certain information, if my office would have been secured properly, and I'll get into that, and only searched by Raleigh's team, they would have found information of Spielman telling on himself. And people may want to call me a snitch or whatever, but my job was to, if dirty staff is bringing stuff in, dirty staff is assaulting inmates, it's the same thing. That was my job, part of my job. And I was getting ready to go into a position of higher responsibility. I was getting ready to be promoted to the rank of associate warden. Towards the end of this, when we get towards the end of the last two videos, we'll talk about that more. But I was days away from being promoted to associate warden. And when everything started happening, they found out of a way to get rid of me. And that's what they did. I could have fought it, but they had already trashed my name. You know, I'd have still had some people that wanted to look at me different just because of the investigation. I could have fought it and won and still been there. But with everything that I know, all the way up to the region, it'd have been hard for me to continue my job. But I'm going to lay out groundwork on several officers. See, they took loose paper out of my notebook here and they ripped pages off the front that contained stuff on Spielman and a few other officers. But what they didn't do is they didn't flip through the notebook. Now where I have tabs, these color tabs, there was stuff written further in the notebook on different officers that they didn't get, which that's stuff that I had backed up at the house anyway. But, and like I said, if SOIU, Special Operations Intelligence Unit, if only their staff would have done a thorough search of my office, they would have found evidence on, and I'm not going to use names yet, where on an Officer G, which had already left, Officer A, that we've been trying to get for years, Spillman, I'll say his name because I've already said it. You'd have found information on a sergeant and a lieutenant that was planting contraband on inmates to get them put in seg and get them demoted, that I actually did report and nothing was done. You'd have found evidence where we received information that a sergeant was bringing in contraband, but nothing was done about that. Spillman messing his hand up on the inmate's face. Well, let me hit on that before I close right quick. So when the inmate is interviewed, let me make sure. I put a date on that. When the inmate is interviewed and he starts talking about the staff assaulted him, the inmate tells exactly who assaulted him. Okay? Now, I can't say if the other people assaulted him or not. If they did, they weren't crazy enough to brag like Spillman. The only one that I can say, and it is not hearsay, Spillman told me to my face that he messed his hand up on that inmate's face. That he was probably the one that knocked the inmate's teeth out. The inmate got the poke, his teeth was out. Now, I didn't check his mouth or nothing because, like I said, he had his head down, he was crying. He had sort of long hair and it was down in his face. He had a cut on his head. Like I said, could have been there, but his head was down. He wasn't bleeding or nothing when he left. And his teeth had been knocked out. Now, because of the inmate alleged use of force, the regional director had no choice but to have the State Bureau of Investigations come in. They interviewed everybody. Even I got interviewed on what I done when I got there. And had I seen anything, heard anything. And I told them when I got there, I was running back and forth from the office to the holding cell, to the yard, to operations, to my office. And just looking at camera footage, pulling inmates off the yard for interviews. I had my SRG guys pulling guys off the yard with interviews. I did not have eyes on my SRG guys at the whole time because, like I said, there was a lot of time that I spent in the office with Miss Walsh and Miss Priest, and we were looking at video. I was in my office looking at video. I was helping interview inmates. I was just everywhere. So is it possible that the people that the inmate said assaulted him? Yes. Did he report it before he left? No. After the SBI finished their investigation in February, this happened in July. So 8 months later, 7.5 months later, they finished their investigation and said that this is what the SBI agent told me and Miss Priest. Miss Priest was the warden at this time as Walsh had retired. Told me and Miss Priest that something happened to the inmate, but nobody's talking, so they can't prove anything. Even the SBI agent knew something happened. Once we come back, Miss Priest reports it up to the region. We had 2 officers that were on no offender contact. Officer Porter could have no offender contact. He responded to the call that day, and the inmate had put his name in it also. And Lieutenant Fields had no offender contact because the inmate had put his name in it. So they were working no offender contact post. The region cleared them to go back on the unit. I let my SRG guys know, hey, SBI said they're done with this investigation, for the excessive force part. Of course, they had to investigate the officer being assaulted part, so they couldn't charge nobody on the excessive force. Now, I want to share with you, I can't get the video up there now, but I want to share with you, not the video, let me see if I've got the picture. Let's see if it'll let me give it to you. All right, I'm trying to load it. But anyway, this assault on Officer Skipper happened in July of 2023. The offender was finally charged in September of 2024. Now, this is John David's office for you, and he's quitting, he's retiring or whatever, he's not running no more now. But the only thing that they charged this offender with was assault on a government employee, assault with a deadly weapon with intent, with inflicting serious injury. He got a minimum of 3 years on the first charge, max 5 years. Minimum of 3 years on the second charge, max 5 years. The assault on a government employee is being run concurrent, so he gets no extra time for that. And then the second charge is running consecutive, so he'll pull an extra 3 to 5 years on that. Now, what should have happened, and I don't know why the North Carolina Attorney General's office, which is Josh Stein, which is the governor now, didn't get involved. You had an inmate that brutally assaulted a staff member, stood over the staff member, and told him to play dead or he was going to kill him. When he was interviewed, he told staff that his intention, when he went in there, was to kill the officer. He should have been charged with attempted murder based off his own confession. But John David's office, our region didn't get involved to make sure that the offender was charged correctly. Our Secretary of Corrections, our people in Raleigh didn't get involved to make sure that the offender was charged correctly. That offender should have been charged with attempted murder. But no, he's already in there on a murder charge. But no, he gets 3 to 5 years run concurrent, which is nothing because he's already pulled in that time. And then he's going to get 3 to 5 years run consecutive. That is really nothing to him. Nobody tried to intervene and make sure that this offender was charged correctly. He should have had an attempted murder charge on him based off of his own admission. But I can't get that picture pulled up of what his charge is, and I'll show you in the next episode. I'll start off on that. But in closing today, in this first episode of the Nicholson effect, and like I said, Jeffrey Ivey, thank you for the title of my series. I appreciate it. But the Nicholson effect, you're going to see things that have been swept under the rug, and when I tried to bring them out, they forced me out. And like I said, the regional director didn't want... If Mr. Jacobs would have come to me and said, hey, I don't think that you need to be the associate warden at this time, he's the boss. Fine. The main reason I was putting in for it because in my position, I didn't get paid overtime. That was a raise for me and my family. I was getting ready to get somewhere around a $12,000 raise. Possibly a little bit more. $12,000 would have got me in line to where the other associate wardens at my size prisons were making. So, but when they saw a chance to get me, and like I said, some of the information that I'm going to give you, the regional director knew, especially this one officer, has been bringing in contraband for years. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but this officer, every time we would be close, would holler race, and we'd be told to leave him alone. The regional director wouldn't touch him for some reason. I don't know. But I thank you for joining this first episode of the Nicholson Effect. More to come. My plan is to release a new episode every week. So this one is going to be released on January 1st. Start the year off with my first episode. And we're going to go from there on YouTube. Now, if you have any questions about anything, you can put it in the comments. If you follow me on TikTok, you can send me a DM. I'm on Instagram. You can DM me. If you got information you want to send me, my email is thetacticalreporter@mail.com. If you have questions, I'll be glad to talk about them. I'll create an episode just to talk about them based off questions I receive from this episode. But when I do anything, may God bless you. I hope that you have a good day. And I hope the right people see these videos. Because by the time I get to the end, I'm going to have information. And it's not nothing that I've kept. 99% of it is information that I've given NCDAC, and they've had the opportunity to move. It doesn't take a year to have people do polygraph exams, etc. that you have the power to do, but you won't do it. And to me, and I can't say, I'll say this because I don't want to talk bad about the Secretary, Miss Dukes. Me and her shared communication. She assigned somebody to get the information, ask me questions, and I don't think the prior administration would have done that. I don't. Miss Dukes is an attorney. She's worked all over, so she understands the law, and I think that she doesn't want the agency to look bad, but she also doesn't want people in the agency that could eventually cause her some major problems as the secretary. So I appreciate her for assigning somebody to talk to me. But as always, may God bless you. I thank you for tuning in to the first episode of the Nicholson Effect. Have a good day.